Well, Jim, a 3-0 victory for England over Latvia. It was pulsating stuff.
It sure was. Oh, there were times where Wembley sounded like a sort of conference centre when not much is going on. Just that buzz of people having really quiet chats in the background, but loads of them.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. It's kind of what we expected. Latvia to park every single bus that they could find. England to be on the front foot the whole game. And the question was, were they going to be a little bit more scintillating, if you like, in attack and blow Latvia away, or were they going to labour to a victory? And I suppose it was more the latter than the former.
Yeah, very much so, I think. But again, it is the weird kind of fairly unique circumstances of games like this, where, you know, in a tournament, or certainly up against a better team in a qualifying campaign, even, you aren't going to get a team who pack the box and defend essentially as their sole purpose, even when they're losing. You know, it's such a strange environment in which to try and kind of get an idea of the new ideas that Tuchel's trying to implement, and for him to try and get an idea of what options he's got at his disposal. So, as you mentioned earlier, it was essentially very much what we were expecting. The kind of the only really thing that you could expect, England were never in any danger of sort of dropping a testy there, I would say. So it was, it was interesting, wasn't it? The box looked like the Royal Rumble at times, particularly in the first half, which was absolutely packed just constantly, and England put in a fair few crosses that seemed to just get kind of headed into oblivion in the first half. I thought Rashford worked very hard. A few things didn't come off for him, but he kind of kept going, and I think actually the quality of delivery wasn't there for him really at any point, but I was impressed with how he just sort of kept beavering away and endeavouring. Bowen kind of didn't get into the game as much, but I think a lot of the play was kind of focused more down the left-hand side, so I wouldn't say that's really Bowen's fault. But yeah, essentially it was exactly what you would expect from them playing a team 140th in the world, or ranked 140th.
Like I say, it wasn't the 5-0 drubbing of Albania that time before Tuchel took over, or the 7-0 hammering of North Macedonia at Old Trafford. But of course, that was Southgate's England, which was at times very scintillating. People often forget, Jim.
Indeed, and he'd had a little bit more time, hadn't he?
He had a little bit more time
to get his squad together.
I'm being a little bit naughty there, but allow me, everybody. But yes, I mean, we have to mention the opening goal, of course. Reece James scored an absolute beauty. I think for a while he thought that the ball hadn't gone in. Many people said, did he play for Latvia when he was a kid? Or, you know, did he have a loan spell or something? Refused to celebrate, although did have a chuckle with Jude Bellingham during the celebrations. But the goal itself was a thing of beauty, Jim.
Absolutely. I think even if the goalkeeper had attempted to save it, he wouldn't have been able to. I still think he should have attempted to save it. I just think that's a really basic part of that.
Well, he goes over there, and I often think, because you see goalkeepers do this, and quite clearly it's far easier said than done, because the ball is whipped at such pace, it comes over the wall and then it goes. You do think to yourself, you should have just had a go there, mate.
Yeah, as every fullback seems to have been, he was apparently a striker in his youth, and like he hit it like a striker. It was an absolutely brilliant finish. I think I once, because I was very bored and I'm a really cool guy, put together a team, an 11 made up exclusively of right backs, and I had Reece James as my centre forward, and I think he's repaid my faith there, and I think that, you know, I've been proven correct.
Did you have Trent Alexander-Arnold at right back?
No, he was my playmaker. I think I had Kyle Walker-Peters at right back, actually. It was obviously the area of least consideration. It was a brilliant goal, though, wasn't it? And we needed it, because there was a point where Sam Matterface had time for a detailed description of the relaying of Andorra's pitch, and just nothing happened in the game to interrupt him talking about that. So it really, really needed a little bit of a spark. And Wembley did sound a little bit quiet, didn't it, as it can, and understandably can. And, you know, when it is essentially a training exercise, it's going to be like that.
Yeah, no, it was a good goal. Reece James' first goal for England, of course. And the right back spot for so long for England, of course, was Kyle Walker. So Reece James, he won't be picked on free kicks alone, but good for him to get a start. But we'll talk about the personnel in future squads and upcoming games in a moment. Staying with the actual game itself, England produced bits and pieces in that first half. I mean, there was a moment for a while, Latvia were the team who had the better chance of the two sides. Of course, a bit of a mix-up between Gay and Pickford, and it's that moment where everyone goes,
oh, no.
Yeah, get that out the way now, please.
My giddy Uncle Mark.
Yes.
He had another moment in the first half as well, didn't he, where he slipped over. So I think it might not have been the best performance for him in the eyes of Tuchel, but I'm sure that he's going to get more chances, and obviously he won't judge him solely on that.
Sure. So 1-0 at half time, and then second half, Tuchel did something. I say interesting, that's perhaps over-egging it, but something we don't see very often. He put the left-footed Jarrod Bowen on the left wing and the right-footed Marcus Rashford on the right wing. And I thought to myself, bring on Dominic Solanke, mate. You got yourself a 4-4-2, old-fashioned style there.
I'm sort of worried about this. By the time the World Cup comes around, he's going to be singing Vindaloo with his shirt off and St George's Cross painted on his torso. I think he might be in danger of going a bit too far into the sort of English tradition in terms of that. The English tradition is to not win things, isn't it? So you got to get that balance.
Yeah, that is why he was brought in, though, Jim. We need a man from a country who have a proven track record of winning. But
but we don't want to get England on him, do we? That's the problem.
Yeah, that's true. Well, a sprinkling of German efficiency, and then he's off. But interesting, as I say, left footer on the left wing, right footer on the right wing. You very seldom see that, to the point of, I can remember the last time I saw it, which was when Anthony Gordon put in that cross for Isak. Was it against Arsenal? I can't remember who it was against. And Isak powered in the header and they won 1-0. And Alan Shearer was shouting, "It's a 90s goal!" So oddly, that little quirk doesn't happen often. But Tuchel obviously thought, well, we're not really breaking them down. Let's try and mix this up. So, it was sort of a slight tactical tweak, which didn't really bring too much joy about, of course. And then England sort of slightly labouring, going through the gears. They were always going to score again, and it came from a run from, for my money, England's most important player, maybe other than Jude Bellingham. Although I don't know. I'm going to stick to my guns on that. It came from a run from England's most important player, Declan Rice, who put the ball on a plate for Harry Kane.
Yeah, very, very good. I thought it was good again, Declan Rice. It's a strange game, isn't it, where your defensive duties are so easily dealt with that you're essentially kind of marauding all around the pitch. But he ratted around as he does in his own words to great effect. It was a really, really good ball.
Jim, would you push back on my point at all that Declan Rice is England's most important player?
I wouldn't dare to offer an opinion on England in the presence of Marcus Speller, mate. You think about this far more deeply than I do. There is probably an argument he's the player that England would struggle to replace the most were he not available.
That's kind of what I'm going on, yeah.
I think that's fair.
That's what I was going on anyway. You can argue the toss about that, but he's very important, and he provided a nice little moment and a good assist for Kane. And then Eberechi Eze comes on, of course, and scores. And the initial thought for me was when Eze comes on is his feet looked a little quicker than Rashford's and Bowen, and of course he scored, but then the defenders are a bit more tired by the time he's on, and it takes obviously a big deflection. And Eze sometimes he sometimes has critics with regard to his final product, because when he does score for Palace, it's usually a beauty, and he'll chip in with a goal or two and an assist or two in a concentrated spell. So I was, all that aside, though, very, very pleased for him to score. He looked made up for it. Although in the post-match interview with Gabriel Clark, who was very aggressive with his microphone action. Did you see that? He would ask.
I can't say I did.
It was a proper thrust in their face. So I understand why Eze and Reece James were perhaps not the most, shall we say, charismatic in the interview. But maybe that's just them
terrified of Gabriel.
But maybe
Clark.
They were just terrified of ITV's Gabriel Clark. But let's drill down a little bit on the personnel and the formation used a bit more. Obviously, Gay came in. I mentioned Bowen there. Morgan Rogers got some minutes. He looked quite lively. Might be disappointed he didn't score.
Yeah, he looked very very keen to get as many shots off as possible, didn't he? Certainly in the second half.
I thought he could have laid it on for Foden. And
so did I.
Foden also thought that as well, I think. But fair play to him. He didn't moan too much. But Tuchel himself, much is being made about this clock ticking between now and the start of the World Cup. and it's not a unique situation that Tuchel's in. I suppose for us as England fans, it's a slightly more particular situation because I'm not sure in my living memory an England manager has been sort of parachuted in to do a particular job. I mean, I remember very different circumstances, but I remember when Roy Hodgson first got the job, he went in and Euro 2012 quickly came around, so we had to kind of assemble a side.
It was a sort of emergency thing, wasn't it? Where this is very, very different.
Yeah, and but obviously it was not the best period as you know, as an England fan, but the idea was that he was always going to have time, always going to have more tournaments. So yeah, there's nothing really, as I say, in my memory that I can think of where it's been as particular as this. Obviously, other nations, you know, have got managers in specifically for a tournament, you know. So again, it's not that unique. But to us, I suppose it's a little different. And I think that a lot is being made of this lack of time. It's kind of like as the minutes tick down towards the start of the World Cup, and Thomas Tuchel's still scratching his head. So,
which is funny, isn't it? Because the time works in the same way for everybody.
Yeah.
So all the other countries also have to deal with the limits of time itself.
And he wouldn't be the
just
first
determined to find problems where there are none. Is that the beginning of this?
Maybe. And Tuchel himself, though, has come out. He's very honest, of course. And I'm sure he's got an idea of how he wants to play. I mean, it's pretty obvious from what we've seen. You know, he's going to start with Harry Kane, despite what some people may say. He's going to start with Jude Bellingham in the creative heart of that midfield. Declan Rice will play as well. You know, he joked before the game saying, you know, it'll be a 4-2-3-1, you know, what I like to do. But he went on to say in the press conference, I still have the idea to play in a 4-1-4-1 with 5 very offensive players and Declan Rice as a holding midfielder. But would this give us enough control in midfield? Sometimes I think about it, if it would be the right thing to play in a very traditional 4-4-2 as an English national team. A lot of crosses, 2 strikers on the pitch. So he's saying these things. I mean, I can't imagine he would do that. I mean, I don't think 4-4-2 is dead or anything. I think it's not used by many people. And again, the variations on that, is it a diamond or a flat forward? I'd be surprised if he put 2 strikers on the pitch. But it's interesting as he mentions a very traditional English national team. Of course, a lot of these young players would not have grown up in that style of football, really. It's that 4-3-3 has become the kind of de facto what it used to be a 4-4-2, of course. And he went on to say, we have to get the process right to find the very best group. And if that means we leave very good and talented players out of the squad, this can happen. In the next 16 months, it's important we find the right team and not the most talented 26 players.
That's key, isn't it?
It is. We need to get the team spirit right, because it's one thing to play qualifiers, is another to play tournament football. When you hear him saying these things about the formation, Jim, about the personnel and so on, what are your thoughts? How does it make you feel?
Well, it's refreshing, because you would hope that every person who's ever managed England is constantly thinking about this stuff, because there's no correct answer, is there? You essentially have to forge your own correct answer through through your ability as a coach, and also with the circumstances that are unusual and unique to international football, in that you can't sign players and you've just got what's in front of you. So it gives me a lot of encouragement. I was very interested to hear him talk about potentially playing with 2 number 10s, because I think actually for probably the last kind of half an hour, 35 minutes of the game, I think he tried that tonight by pushing Morgan Rogers up a little bit as well, because it is a sort of game where you can experiment with these things, but it's also the sort of game where you won't really notice if it works so much, because as we touched on before, they're really sort of unique circumstances. So I think Tuchel is the type of character who is going to obsess over this, and I think by the next set of games, there will probably be 3 or 4 different types of game state, if you want to put it that way, that he will try to enact. And I think with a limited time, he kind of has to do that, doesn't he? And England have an abundance of really, really talented players, and they all seem to be in that sort of central part of the pitch. So it's all well and good saying you've got to get the most functional team rather than the most talented players, but the kind of mixing and matching of working at what that is really, really difficult. So I think he will think about this in his dreams, and the things he comes up with in his dreams will be more valuable than, say, something Steve Bruce could come up with.
Oh, don't have a go at Brucey. He's had a tough week.
I didn't have a go at him. Dwight Gale just, repeated something he'd said, and it sounded like criticism.
Well, I think what's going to happen is Tuchel is going to experiment. He's going to play different players, as everybody does as manager. But I think a lot will be made of this time limit that he has on his contract, and therefore we assume the job. Because there's no talk about it. Well, if it goes pretty well, will he stay on? I think we're all agreed. If he was to win the World Cup, then he would be mad to stay on. I think that goes for any England manager. You win a tournament, get the hell out of there, because it's never going to get any better than that. And of course, it hasn't happened for a long old time, lest we forget. And if he doesn't win it, then he'll probably be handed out anyway. But I think with this perceived lack of time, I think every England squad now, if somebody's called up that people don't quite fancy, they're not so sure, it will be scrutinised so much in a way perhaps that we didn't see so much under Southgate, and maybe until towards the end, or when he picked actual tournament teams and squads. And I'd have no doubt that Tuchel, again, if he was parachuted in just before the tournament and England qualified for it, I would still trust him to come up with something decent enough. So again, if he just falls back on his basic principles, he'll be okay. But looking at the fixtures England have now, well, their next match isn't till June, and it's against Andorra. Lads, it's Andorra. So
it's a ski resort, isn't it? You want to be winning that.
Yeah, Andorra, the population of the average street in Britain. So England will win that very, very comfortably. The next game after that is a friendly against Senegal, and you think, well, okay, that's a bit more like it. Senegal are a handy side. Then after that, into September, at home to Andorra, again, it's a gimme. They go away to Serbia, and that'll be more of a test.
Yeah, Serbia are a funny one, aren't they? So obviously England were dreadful against them in the Euros. Despite that, I still feel like you always expect to get more from Serbia than you do when you look at the names on the team sheet, and then what comes out on the pitch seems to be a little kind of flat. So though they are the best team England have on paper coming up, probably other than the Senegal, it's still not a proper test.
No,
that's going to give you a taste of what you might get at a tournament, and we're not going to have that for a long time.
Well, no, in the rest of the calendar year, friendly against Wales, and then Latvia away, Serbia at home, and Albania away. I don't understand Serbia at home and Albania away.
Tricky.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah. They're games England would expect to win, but this is why, and I think Lee Dixon did it in co-coms. He bemoaned the fact that England were relegated from their Nations League group and were not basically involved in last night's games, which you saw proper matches. But then, someone might say, well, that had come too early for Tuchel. Like, goodness knows, you can wrap yourself up in knots here. But
it's our own fault, isn't it? It's our own fault for getting relegated.
It's not Tuchel's fault. That's something we can totally agree. So I find it interesting with what he's going to do. I think ultimately he will. My prediction would be he will ultimately try this player, that player, maybe tinker with the formation. He will come back to probably his 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3, whatever you want to go with, that formation. I know he's a fan of a back three. He may well deploy that. But I think he will come back to that. I don't think it will be too dissimilar to what we're used to. It will be Kane up top, Bellingham in behind.
Yeah.
And I think he will probably like the more pragmatic approach when it comes to the crunch, assuming England qualify, and if England find themselves against bigger and better opponents, Jones perhaps next to Declan Rice. I don't know, maybe if Kobbie Mainoo comes back in, I know he's a different type of player. Whoever, take your pick. That's what I think he'll do. The only player that gives us all food for thought, and it's delicious food, is Miles Lewis-Skelly, because of what he does for Arsenal and what he's already doing for England, coming inside and basically joining in with Declan Rice. We've seen Guardiola sides do this before, so maybe that frees up another player, and perhaps Tuchel puts in a more attacking option in that midfield, whether it is Morgan Rogers, as we saw. But with Lewis-Skelly, I was going to ask you specifically, Tim, you've seen him play for Arsenal, and you've seen him play against better sides, quite frankly, than Albania and Latvia. Do you ever think that when he's in that midfield, does he look the part? Does he? And this is my kind of negative English hat on. I'm thinking, well, if he moves in there, there's a big gap at left back. Who's going to, you know what I mean? Yeah. And obviously, I know it becomes a 3, and they all kind of shuffle over. But when he's playing for Arsenal, does it look the part when he's doing that, or do you think sometimes he struggles to get back, or what are your?
No, he spent most of his kind of development, or the most recent part of his development before he actually broke into the first team as a left back, playing as a midfielder, and he spent a lot of that time as a kind of traditional number 6 as well. So he's very, very comfortable in that space. There are times where he's so comfortable on the ball, it's actually sort of terrifying, because even when he's the last man, he's very, very calm. He's good at shielding the ball. He doesn't mind shielding the ball and trying to sort of turn around someone even when he's the last man, which, as I say, is kind of terrifying, but I think does come from his background in that role, where he's so used to that move that he feels comfortable doing it without the cover of a defender behind him. So I think, the Miles Lewis-Skelly we've seen in these 2 England games is the Miles Lewis-Skelly that we've seen for Arsenal. I found it very interesting, actually, that there's a point where probably the only time I really remember seeing Miles Lewis-Skelly play out wide for sort of further up the pitch was when Reece James had tucked in from the other side. So clearly that's something that they're thinking about, and that there are obviously plans to cover those gaps. One goes, one stays, I suppose. There's just simply no escaping that in the England setup. But yeah, it's interesting to me because he doesn't actually spend that much time out wide. So you potentially lose a bit of width there as well. But I suppose the idea is you've got Rashford or Gordon or whoever it will be, doing what they do in that position. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I do wonder about players like Lewis-Skelly and maybe Rico Lewis as well. Some of these younger players coming through Lewis playing this inverted role, and like what will happen to them when their managers move on, and if they want to play a different way, and if they don't quite suit a more traditional left back role, do they become midfielders or whatnot? But that's, I suppose, a conversation for another time. But it's an interesting option to have a player who's very, very comfortable doing that in the England setup, and a very welcome surprise.
With Lewis-Skelly, I think I mean, again, the left back position right now is his to lose. I know Lewis Hall will come back into contention when he's fully fit,
which is great because they're such different players as well. That's exactly what we're just talking about, isn't it? It gives you 2 really, really different options.
Well, it does, yeah. I mean, I would say if Luke Shaw ever comes back to fitness, but sadly for him, that doesn't ever seem to be the case, really. So yeah, Lewis-Skelly, I think, is a good option there. Provide an extra body in midfield if needs be, and so on. And these are the things that Tuchel is going to have to figure out. Like I say, when he starts pondering about a 4-1-4-1 or does he go 4-4-2, these are flights of fantasies having in his head, which I think we all have. I think he's probably thinking, how could I get Foden, Palmer, Bellingham, Eza, Kane, like all these players, how can I get them all into a side?
And it also depends on the type of match you're imagining when you're sort of envisioning that, because a game like this, and kind of similar against Albania to a point as well, there's so little space that you're not seeing your team attacking space in that formation.
No, and so I think that he's having these flights of fantasy. How can I get all these players in there? But then, like I say, when I was reading that quote earlier, he does come back to, but it's not about the most talented 26 players. It's about the players that we need. It's essentially, what's to go all the way back. Sorry to reference the 1960s, but when Sir Alf Ramsey said to Jack Charlton, you're in, and Charlton said, why am I? And I've got to ask you because I'm getting my first cap quite late in my career. And he said, I don't pick the best players, I pick the players I need, which is one of the greatest backhanded compliments you'll find in the history of English football. But that's it. And I think that Tuchel, as time goes on, it might not even be this calendar year because of those games, or it could be towards the end of this calendar year when they play Serbia, when they go away to Albania, when we start to see the players that, as I say, there's a core of that squad. We can already pick it, but we start to see some players who, hang on a minute, he's picked whether it be, say, Morgan Rogers for 4 squads in a row now.
Yeah.
And one or two people have dropped out of there. So that's really what it is. With these 2 games, it's not really told us too much.
Yeah. Do you feel like you know much more about it than you did before the games actually happened?
Yeah, not particularly. And people around me when I was at the Albania game were saying, well, it's just the same as the last regime and so on. I mean, obviously these are flippant comments. And again, like you're not going to see that. We will only really truly know the difference when the going really does get tough, I suppose.